Today we're going to watch a video produced by the Jehovah's Witnesses. Be ready to share the good news of peace. Take the initiative. The goal of this particular video is to train Jehovah's Witnesses on how to take the initiative in their preaching, specifically when preaching informally. Let's get started. So right away, we're presented with a Jehovah's Witness couple who's perhaps preaching with a younger couple, or maybe it's their kids, son-in-law or daughter-in-law or something like that. And they've probably been out preaching all morning and now they're on their lunch break. We see the wife sort of slide into the booth and exchange a little nod, a little pleasantry with the lady sitting next to her. And then you see the whole family agree that it's time to pray over their food. And so they all bow their heads and pray all at once. If this is part of your religious practice, or you just feel compelled to pray before you eat, by all means do your thing. But this is obnoxious because the witnesses love to quote the scripture at Matthew 6:2, where Jesus was criticizing the Pharisees, saying, that don't be like the hypocrites who stand on the street corners, for all to see. Surely I tell you, they're receiving their reward in full. Jehovah's Witnesses always pride themselves on the fact that they're so modest in contrast to the Pharisees. In comparison to other churches or pastors who maybe, praying with their church group at the pizza joint. So seeing the whole family sort of in unison make a scene of praying at the restaurant, teetering on the edge of hypocrisy. But let's keep going.
They seemed nice.
I knew what Yuri was thinking.
I wanted to start a conversation, but I didn't want to bother them either. And when an opportunity came, I just froze.
Okay. So, as mentioned at the outset, the premise of this video is that the family just finished preaching in their public ministry, meaning they just finished knocking on doors, or perhaps they, were cart witnessing somewhere in town in a town square. But now that they're out of that formal setting, are they just going to stop preaching? Are they really off the clock? Or are you going to take the initiative and continue to preach even though there isn't a door frame around the other person? Just a moment ago, we're presented with this sister who has expressed reluctance to strike up a conversation with the lady sitting next to her. She says, I wanted to start a conversation, but I also didn't want to bother them either. So now what the implication is, what the organization wants the viewer to ask themselves is, well, are you going to get over yourself and do what you know you're supposed to do? Are you going to interrupt that lady anyway? Even though your initial correct gut instinct was to leave her alone and let them eat their lunch in peace? The organization is clearly telling Jehovah's Witnesses, you can't just relax and exist wherever you go. You have to ignore your instincts and needs and constantly be on the lookout for new opportunities in casual, even inappropriate settings to solicit and push our message. So let's see what happens next.
Then I was in a rush to give a witness. It felt forced. It helped to hear that we'd all been there. Our past experiences were similar.
So this segment alone is extremely manipulative. When the sister Yuri notices the couple is getting ready to leave, she hops up, grabs a little brochure, a little piece of literature, and sort of rushes into this rehearsed presentation, and it bombs. She walks away looking deflated, like she failed. They know what they're doing. The organization is playing up that guilt factor because they know it works. They know that any witness who has ever been in that situation walked away from that so-called failed interaction and berated themselves. But the important thing that people have to remember is that this sister's initial human reaction to people casually eating their lunch was to leave them alone. Maybe if she was going door to door, she'd have no problem striking up a conversation because she understands where she's at. She's in an organized, coordinated effort to preach to people at their homes, whether or not you agree with that or think that's right. She understands that's the setting for preaching. But in this case, she knew that if she whipped out a religious brochure at a cafeteria after barely exchanging a few smiles and some table salt, that it would be a form of solicitation at a place of business. She knew she'd basically be harassing the lady. So when she sort of confessed that her attempt to informally witness felt forced, that's because it was. The pressure this sister felt, the compulsion or obligation she felt to do something so unnatural, is not self-generated. Jehovah's Witnesses are pressured incessantly, relentlessly to do more, preach even though you're uncomfortable, preach even if your life is threatened. So, it should come as no surprise that this poor sister can't even enjoy her lunch after being on her feet for 2 hours, most likely preaching to very apathetic, even hostile strangers in the ministry. As is the case with all their videos and content that they produce, the organization presents this very generic, overly wholesome image, but withholds some darker information that would otherwise influence the viewer's perception of what's going on. And what I mean by that is, the reason this sister is taking this so hard is not because she's inadequate or lazy, but because she has been taught to save other people. And because she let that person sort of slip through her fingers, because she failed to lay that foundation for a possible conversion in the future, she now believes that is a person who will most likely die at Armageddon, and it's her fault. And let's see how it ends.
Whenever we didn't put pressure on ourselves and just looked for something in common to talk about, we could usually find a moment when we could say something about the Bible. She was curious why we were dressed up. Turns out that she'd never talked to Jehovah's Witnesses before.
Okay. First, we realize, when we didn't put pressure on ourselves, the whole thing would have just fallen into place, is classic Watchtower gaslighting. She's telling herself, if I had just relaxed, if I didn't, take things so seriously, I wouldn't have just sabotaged that opportunity for myself. I should stop putting pressure on myself. No, Watchtower has put pressure on her. By making it look like you have some personal flaw or social neuroses you just need to overcome and you'll be successful, the organization completely deflects responsibility for making their parishioners feel inadequate and stressed. And because fried chicken is the ultimate segue into talking about the Bible, they wrap up this scene with, a little glimmer of hope. The next pair of diners comes to sit down next to them. Sister gets a little, a little excited that there are these fresh faces she can now talk to, so she can now redeem herself and not screw up the mission again. So yeah, we get a little bit of a cliffhanger here, but this is a classic Watchtower ending where it always, ends on a positive note, with, of course, the outsider responding favorably. Oh my God, you're a Jehovah's Witness? Yes, I'm so curious as to why you're so buttoned up. The younger sister who's portraying the curious worldly girl looks like she works at H&M. But yes, she's so intrigued by a group of middle-aged people who clearly look like they just got out of church on a Wednesday at noon. However, I do want to comment on the contrast between the first couple our sister Yudi tried to preach to and the second couple. The first couple, it looks like they're scurrying off because they feel cornered and awkward about the exchange. But I would even go so far as to say that this is an older couple with life experience, and it's quite possible this isn't their first rodeo. That when they saw that brochure, they were like, oh, it's you guys. No, I'm good. Hard pass. By contrast, you get the younger couple, the younger lady, who is polite and a little bit more chatty, and I think this is an interesting choice to wrap up this narrative because it implies the younger woman is naive. Maybe due to her youth and inexperience, she'll be a little bit more receptive or malleable. Of course, in real life, it could very well be the other way around. You know, maybe the older couple falls for it and the younger crowd is like, no, I'm good. I was weaned on social media. I know all your tricks. But either way, this dramatization is a perfect example of Watchtower using guilt to pressure their members into preaching at all times. I used to do this all the time growing up in the organization. I used to take the initiative and do informal preaching all the time, and it makes you stop viewing people as people. Instead, they become targets almost, something to win or obtain. I mean, I remember being 12 years old and my mother telling me to be brave and walk into a really busy, bustling laundromat on a Saturday morning and, by myself and just accost random men and women, folding their underwear and go give them a magazine. So, your thoughts? If you are a former Jehovah's Witness watching this, what was your experience with informal witnessing? Or did you have a Jehovah's Witness try to preach to you in some random informal moment? As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.